Good morning to all of you. I'm sorry I can't be present in person at this important conference, but I'm really pleased, nonetheless, to have the opportunity to address you, even remotely. I've been asked today to speak on the first question on your agenda: what is transformation? As the title of my presentation suggests, I'd like to address this in two ways. What is transformation from a social science viewpoint? And what kind of transformation do we need in the social sciences if we are to address the challenge being posed? The conference organizers have framed this challenge in terms you see on this slide. A twofold challenge, then: moving to solution-oriented research and building on what we already know about transformation. I would suggest that neither of these is easy, based on the current organization of social science within the academy. Let's begin with a definition. The word transformation is an old one. It comes from the Latin trans, which means across, or on the other side of, and formare, to form, or be a formation. So transformation suggests a radically new formation, if not of the elements that form the system, then of the relationship between those elements. A system change, then, from our current unsustainable system to one that is sustainable, and all that implies. Seamus Heaney, the Nobel Prize winner for literature, tells us that despite everything, we should hope for such a transformation, which he calls, in his wonderful poem A Cure for Troy, a sea change on the far side of revenge. Of course, he was referring to the intractable problem of Northern Ireland, but the challenge of sustainability is no less intractable. So, a sea change on the far side of revenge. Sea change is a nice term for transformation, but what of the reference to revenge? Surely that does not apply here. However, later in the poem, Heaney talks about the conditions that he sees for such a breakthrough. Call the miracle self-healing, the utter, self-revealing double-take of feeling, he writes. Perhaps Heaney is suggesting, as Peter Senge does, that if we are to take a systems view, the problem does not only lie out there. We must look inward as well. In the 20 minutes I have available, I want to talk about social science from the perspective of sociology, which is the social science that I know best. I would like to suggest that social science began with a focus on transformation, indeed great transformations, in Polanyi's words. However, right from the beginning, there was tension between the early sociologists in how to approach the problem and that concept. Today, those tensions persist and present real barriers to identifying, researching, and acting on the great transformations of our own day. I hope to simply raise some questions about these barriers and then offer modest suggestions drawn from a career in interdisciplinary work for how one might begin to address those barriers. The three founding fathers of sociology, Karl Marx, Max Weber, and Emile Durkheim, all focused on the huge transformation of their day, that of the Industrial Revolution, how and why it was happening, what fueled and maintained it, how did it affect the individuals and groups who made up the society of the day. Their approaches, however, as we have already noted, were radically different. Karl Marx, whose work chronologically came first, focused on material relations. For Marx, industrialization was driven by the appropriation of the means of production by the ruling class and the mystification of these power arrangements through religion and ideology. He longed for a transformation, and he felt it was inevitable. It would occur through a process of demystification and class conflict. The lens through which he looked at social arrangements was that of power and economics. Who benefits from the current arrangements has been the enduring question of Marxists and their descendants. Marx felt the role of the social scientist was to use analysis to speed the demystification process and to engage the revolution whenever possible. Emile Durkheim, on the other hand, was interested not so much in conflict and power as he was in social order. His questions had to do with the structure and function of the various parts of society. For him, the social scientist should model him or herself not after the revolutionary, but rather after the natural scientist or physician. The body social had its parts. Each had a form or structure which suited its function. For example, the economy and industry were engines that fed the body. Religion provided meaning and integration to the whole. Schools provided the skills needed. Governments regulated the operation of each part and of the whole, and so on. For Durkheim, the complex division of labor that characterized the Industrial Revolution was driven by natural evolution, part of an inexorable evolution from simple forms to complex forms, similar to Darwin's theory of evolution of all living organisms. For Durkheim, the social scientist was objective, standing outside the system he studied, like a biologist at his microscope. He felt this objectivity was important for the credibility of the new social science. The last, chronologically, of the three founding fathers was Max Weber. Weber took another tact. Influenced by German philosophy, Weber eschewed objectivity as an illusion. Man could only see through his limited capacities, and these were as much a part of the social and biological world as anything that he could observe. Transformation for Weber was driven by man's search for salvation and meaning. His studies of the great religious traditions suggested that belief and meaning came first, and were the attractors for forms of economic activity and political arrangements that fit and made sense, an idea he termed elective affinity. But what the social scientists could do was to illuminate and understand both the meanings that lay at the core of social action, the social action processes that express those meanings, and the patterns and consequences that emerge from those processes. Because of his view that objectivity was an illusion, Weber did not feel that action discredited the social scientist. He himself became involved in German politics in later years. Please forgive this irreverent and obviously superficial romp over the classics. I review these theories only to take us back to the early days of social science when transformation was the key theme, and to remind us that the distinctive lenses with which the question was approached have proved prophetic and have deeply influenced our capacity to deal with similar grand challenges facing us today. On this slide, I have noted only a few of the theoretical perspectives alive and important in sociology today, many of which I am sure are represented in this room. I admit this slide is no way exhaustive. However, I would argue that most of these perspectives are still fed by those original questions, and that those espousing these theoretical perspectives will approach sustainability, transformation, or any other cross-cutting issue using these particular lenses. Now multiply that by 4 important social science disciplines: political science, economics, psychology, and anthropology, and add to the mix environmental, biological, and physical science, and what you have is a Tower of Babel, a cacophony of voices, a complexity of disciplines, each with their own lens, their own questions, their own methodologies. Victor Galatz, a political scientist working at Stockholm Resilience Centre, said it well. In a recent blog for the Manchester Guardian, he made specific reference to the 108 separate papers in the 2013 World Social Science Report by the ISSC entitled Change in Global Environments. You can look, he wrote, at the scientific diversity presented in this report in 2 ways, either as a science fair or as a football stadium. In the fair scenario, visitors are impressed and engaged by the massive diversity of perspectives, issues, and methodologies. In the football stadium scenario, however, visitors are instead so overwhelmed by the chaotic noise, screams, and annoying vuvuzelas that no meaningful reflection and dialogue is possible. If I were a policymaker, activist, concerned citizen, or business leader, I would probably perceive the state of social science research as a chaotic football stadium, with the audience cheering a countless number of different teams. So what to do? One way to bring some coherence to the cacophony is to select a framework which is deliberately integrative. A number of these exist in social sciences. Talcott Parsons' theory of collective action, Habermas's communicative competence, Tony Giddens' structuration theory, and a branch of complexity theory developed by C.S. Holling called resilience theory. When it comes to understanding transformation, transitions, and social innovations, These theories offer a framework under which questions of power, structure, function, process, and meaning can all be explored. For example, in the work of my group at the Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience, we draw on both structuration theory and resilience theory to guide our research on social innovation. One approach to transformation. Our definition of social innovation allows for an exploration of the dynamics of emergence, cross-scale impact, and agency. The approach is influenced by the work of the multi-level transition group in Rotterdam and by those studying transformation at Stockholm Resilience Center, among others. As a structuration or complexity approach, it offers a platform under which environmental scientists from other disciplines who are focused on the dynamics of discontinuity, emergence, adjacent possible, the adaptive cycle, and critical transitions can gather. It is not by any means the only platform, but structuration theory and resilience theory are good examples of frameworks that can allow us integration across some of the epistemological divides that separate us. But still, when it comes down to the working team and the day-to-day work of exploration, the platform can get rocky, more of an oil rig in a storm than a stage. Real epistemological agility that allows one to crack the code of theoretical approaches not their own can help, but it still requires patience and more. It takes trust. I remember an afternoon sitting in a cafe with a wonderful system ecologist with whom I had worked often and had a sound friendship. We were working on a paper when suddenly our pleasant accord collapsed. "You have no evidence for that," he said crossly. "It's just journalism." "Oh," I said, equally crossly, "well, your claims are all mathematical, and I don't consider that empirical." We took another couple of glasses of wine to work our way back to safety, but I was reminded how quickly we are brought back to a place of suspicion and mistrust, even in established collaborations, even in friendships, and how emotional that can be. But why emotion? Because our epistemological choices are not random. We adopt them based on ontology, our deeply held beliefs about the nature of being, of what is true and what is good. These beliefs have the emotional clout of morality. As Mark Twain famously said, only partly tongue-in-cheek, lies, damned lies, and statistics. For some, numbers are just lies. For others, qualitative data that reveal meaning and emotion are queasily unreliable. It's hard to change this. Those who study conflict argue that conflict over values is the hardest to address. However hard it is to manage, we as academics could do better at it. Conflict management is a skill. There are many resources at our disposal, and we need to achieve the breakthroughs this challenge requires, and we need conflict to achieve the breakthroughs this challenge requires. It's often said that conflict is necessary for creativity and harmony is necessary for productivity. We also know from study of successful and generative collaborations that good outcomes require high conflict and high participation. But the research also suggests that most academics are conflict averse. Given a choice between 5 recognized conflict styles in a conflict assessment inventory, academics routinely choose 2. The choices are forcing one's own views, accommodating the views of another, compromising, collaborating and building integrative thinking, or avoiding. Academics choose forcing and then avoiding, either refusing to move off a position of expertise or simply engaging. The typical interdisciplinary grant that simply divides up the money and then allows each participant to work on their own with little effort at deep synthesis is a symptom of conflict avoidance. And when practitioners avoid the inclusion of academics in their deliberations, it's usually because of our forcing tendencies. I experienced an example of this some 10 years ago when I was invited to a roundtable run by the National Initiative on Homelessness, a Canadian government effort to address the complex problem of homelessness. There were about 30 people in the room. They were from government, they were from think tanks, they were from NGOs, but conspicuously absent were academics. I was the only one there, and I knew almost nothing about homelessness. It struck me as odd, as I knew I had many colleagues for whom this was their expertise. So at the break, I went to the organizer and asked the question of why there weren't more academics in the room. And her response has stayed with me over the years. She said, "Well, we tried that at first, but the academics just came into the room. They pronounced on what they knew, and then they left. They weren't really willing to work with us." Over the years, I've thought about that statement, and I've come to realize that as academics, we have more to offer than just our expertise in a particular content area. If we were prepared to occasionally step aside from that role as content experts and play another role, what I call servant academics, skilled at thinking and skilled at thinking about thinking, we would have something extra to contribute to those kinds of gatherings and would be more effective, both as researchers in collaboration and as we move to action. Which brings me to the last significant barrier, one we need to overcome if we are to work for solutions to the sustainability crisis, the barrier to action. Having overcome the complexity barriers, the epistemological and ontological barriers, and learned enough about the dynamics and processes of transformation to help practitioners, policymakers, managers, and citizens accelerate their desired change towards sustainability, what then? Do we simply publish and leave the rest to them? We could. We often do. But we know many practitioners do not find such published papers accessible. They do not see them as a blueprint for action. Or do we cross the divide into engagement with the actors themselves? If we choose to do so, I should warn, we will meet with resistance, not perhaps from the practitioners, but from our own colleagues. The belief in objectivity is enshrined in the Academy. The Second World War increased the fear in the social sciences of social engineering. The ivory tower protects us as well as encloses us. When I moved from a sociology department to the business school at McGill University, I was accused of immorality by a senior academic. When some 30 years later I started the Social Innovation Institute at Waterloo, whose mission is both research and action, a similar charge was laid, again by a social scientist. This is unpleasant, but more importantly, it tells us much about the research community. While we talk of Mode 2 knowledge production, which engages practitioners as well as academics in knowledge creation, most of the academic community remains stoutly on the side of non-engagement. Most, but fortunately not all. In every sphere of social science, new methodologies which privilege the engagement of practitioners in knowledge creation have sprung or are springing up. Most of these methodologies, like the synthetic theories I mentioned earlier, draw on more than one epistemological tradition, and most recently, the development of labs, design labs, whole system processes, and social innovation labs, offer new platforms explicitly designed to provide citizens, practitioners, public servants, corporations, and academics with a way to bring their different viewpoints to bear on solutions to complex problems. It takes some getting used to become a servant academic. For some of us, it will never be appealing as a role, but at least it is now available. In conclusion, I believe we, as social scientists, do need self-healing. If we are to build integrated knowledge about transformation and support the change to sustainability, we need to be self-revealing about our epistemologies and ontologies. We need also to be respectful of the theories and beliefs of others, not in the interests of avoidance, but in the interests of deeply cracking the codes and engaging the value those approaches have to offer. We need to be patient, and we need to be skillful, and most of all, we need to take risks. The risks of asking the really big questions, as our founding fathers did, and the risks of crossing the theory-practice divide. It won't be easy, but neither is transformation to sustainability. Thank you for listening. Thank you, ISSC, for putting this challenge before us. I wish you a stimulating and productive conference.